Welcome to the Podcast Lab, your go-to space for raw conversations, curious questions, and inspiring stories from around the world. Whether you're here to learn, laugh, or just listen in, this is where ideas take shape and voices come alive. Ready to dive into fresh perspectives and thought-provoking discussions? Let's get started. This is the Podcast Lab. Subscribe now and never miss an episode.
Ever get that feeling?
Yeah.
Like you stumble upon a story and it just like flips your whole perspective on things.
Yeah, totally.
That's what we're doing today.
Okay.
We're diving deep into these tales of everyday people who ended up changing the course of history.
Yeah, it's amazing. These seemingly ordinary individuals
Right.
who often just by circumstance or sheer courage become catalysts for these massive shifts.
Yeah. And they end up in the textbooks.
Yeah.
Like we all know that image
Uh-huh.
of Rosa Parks refusing to give up her seat on that bus in Montgomery.
Yes.
But what's really fascinating to me is the story behind the story.
Right.
Like she wasn't just some woman who'd had enough.
Right.
Like she was deeply involved with the NAACP.
For years.
For years.
And that's where it gets really interesting because her time with the NAACP wasn't just about going to meetings.
Right.
She was actively trained in strategies for challenging segregation.
Oh, wow.
So she learned from seasoned activists.
Yeah.
She was strategizing with legal minds.
Okay.
He even attended workshops on nonviolent resistance
Wow.
at the Highlander Folk School.
Okay.
All of that fed into that moment on the bus.
It's so interesting. So it wasn't just this like spur of the moment decision.
Exactly.
It was years of prep culminating in this incredibly powerful act.
Yeah, and think about the context, too.
Right.
This is Alabama, 1955.
Yeah.
The courage it took for her as a Black woman to defy that system,
Oh, yeah.
it's hard to overstate that.
Yeah. It really makes you think about how individual actions can have a ripple effect.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the Montgomery bus boycott, a direct result of her defiance.
Right.
It lasted over a year.
Yeah, it crippled the city's transportation system,
Wow.
forced the issue onto the national stage,
Right.
and, it even resonated globally.
Yeah.
Parks Act became a symbol of resistance.
Wow.
It inspired countless other movements for equality,
Wow.
from the U.S. civil rights movement to anti-apartheid struggles in South Africa. That one moment on the bus echoed across decades and continents.
That's wild.
There is.
That's a perfect example of what we're talking about, Octavia. Hold on,
Yeah.
because our next deep dive takes us to the peak of Cold War tensions.
Okay.
We're talking nuclear threats,
Right.
hair trigger alerts,
Yeah.
and one man who may have single-handedly prevented World War III.
Stanislav Petrov.
Yeah.
His story is one of those what-if moments
Right.
that could have reshaped the entire world.
Totally.
But to really grasp it, you have to understand how close we were to disaster back then.
Yeah.
The U.S. and Soviet Union had enough nuclear weapons to wipe each other out many times over.
Right.
And they weren't just sitting there.
Yeah.
Both sides were actively developing more sophisticated weapons,
Okay.
deploying them closer to each other,
Oh, wow.
engaging in these risky maneuvers
Yes.
that could easily escalate.
So the stakes were insanely high.
They were.
And then you have Lieutenant Colonel Petrov,
Yes.
stationed at a Soviet early warning center in 1983. Can you imagine the tension in that room?
I know.
Alarms start blaring.
Oh, my
The
God.
computer system is indicating that 5 U.S. missiles are inbound.
Wow.
And protocol was crystal clear.
Yeah.
Petrov was supposed to immediately report that launch,
Right.
which would set off this chain of command that would likely lead to a retaliatory strike.
Right.
But here's where Petrov's story
Yeah.
diverges from what could have been a catastrophe.
Mm-hmm.
He hesitated.
He hesitated.
He hesitated.
With nuclear missiles supposedly heading towards Soviet territory.
Yeah,
Why?
I know why.
Well,
Right.
he felt in his gut
Okay.
that it was a false alarm.
Wow.
And his intuition was rooted in his understanding of the technology.
Okay.
So the Soviet early warning system at that time,
Mm-hmm.
it was called the OCOS system.
Okay.
It relied on a satellite network and ground-based radar to detect missile launches.
Okay.
Now, it was cutting edge for its time,
Right.
but it was also prone to errors, especially when it came to differentiating real launches from things like sunlight reflecting off clouds.
So one man's understanding of the system's flaws,
Right.
his willingness to question what the computer was telling him,
Exactly.
potentially save millions, if not billions, of lives.
Absolutely. And that's a point that deserves to sink in.
Right.
I mean, his decision highlights how fragile that balance of power was during the Cold War,
Yeah.
and how one individual's critical thinking can have just monumental consequences.
It's insane. Okay, so we've gone from this pivotal moment in the fight for civil rights
Right.
to a near-miss nuclear apocalypse.
Yeah.
And now let's shift gears to a woman who challenged the status quo in a totally different way.
Okay.
A woman who... Could you quickly explain what it was all about?
Sure. Silent Spring, published in 1962,
Okay.
exposed the devastating effects of widespread pesticide use,
Okay.
particularly DDT on ecosystems and wildlife.
Wow.
This was a time when these chemicals were hailed as miracle solutions,
Yeah.
with very little regard for their long-term consequences.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine now, but back then the idea that humans could have such a significant impact on the environment
Right.
was pretty revolutionary.
It was, and, Carson was going up against powerful industries
Right.
that had a vested interest in maintaining the status quo.
Right, of course.
But what's remarkable is that she wasn't just some activist shouting from the sidelines.
Yeah.
She was a meticulous scientist,
Aye.
a marine biologist with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service,
Okay.
who had spent years researching and documenting the effects of these chemicals.
So she brought receipts, so to speak,
She did.
and that made her message even more powerful.
Absolutely. And despite facing intense backlash and personal attacks,
Really?
she never backed down.
Wow.
Silent Spring ignited a public outcry.
Mm-hmm.
It led to increased scrutiny of pesticide use,
Uh-huh.
stricter regulations, and eventually the ban of DDT in the U.S.
Wow.
It's no exaggeration to say that her work was a catalyst for the modern environmental movement as we know it today.
And think about the ripple effect there.
Oh, yeah.
That one book helped shift public consciousness
Yeah.
about the environment,
Mm.
sparking this waves of activism legislation and scientific research that continues to this day.
Absolutely. Carson's story shows us that individuals armed with knowledge and courage
Yeah.
can challenge deeply entrenched systems
Hmm.
and bring about lasting change even when facing powerful opposition.
I love it. Okay, now let's talk about someone who, like Rachel Carson,
Okay.
dared to challenge the status quo,
Right.
but in an entirely different context.
Okay.
We're going back to World War II
Right.
and the story of Irina Sendler,
Oh, wow.
a Polish social worker who risked everything to save Jewish children from the horrors of the Warsaw Ghetto.
The Warsaw Ghetto, established by the Nazis in 1940,
Yeah.
was a horrific place.
I can imagine.
Over 400,000 Jews were crammed into an area originally intended for 60,000.
Oh my gosh.
Conditions were deplorable.
Yeah.
Overcrowding, starvation disease, constant fear of deportation to concentration camps.
It's almost impossible to comprehend the level of suffering and fear that people endured in that place.
I know, and yet amidst this nightmare,
Yeah.
Irina Sendler, working with a network of helpers,
Okay.
orchestrated this incredible rescue operation.
Wow.
They smuggled around 2,500 Jewish children out of the ghetto.
Wow.
Using fake identities,
Okay.
hiding them in ambulances, even sneaking them out in coffins.
Are you serious?
I am.
Wow.
It was incredibly risky, with every move a potential death sentence.
That's wild. It sounds like something straight out of a spy thriller,
It does.
but with real-life stakes that were just unimaginably high.
And what's even more remarkable
Yeah.
is that Sendler kept meticulous records of each child she saved, documenting their real names and new identities,
Oh, wow.
hoping that one day they could be reunited with their families.
Right.
She buried these records in jars, ensuring that even if she were captured,
Yeah.
the children's true identities would survive.
And she was captured, right?
She was.
By the Gestapo.
Yes. In 1943,
Yeah.
Sendler was arrested and tortured.
Oh, my gosh.
But she never revealed the location of the buried jars or the names of the children she had helped.
Wow.
Despite enduring horrific torture, her courage never wavered.
It's just astonishing to have that level of resilience and commitment at the face of such overwhelming evil.
Right.
It's truly inspiring.
Her story is a testament to the indomitable spirit of those who fought against Nazi tyranny, and a powerful reminder that even in the darkest of times,
Yeah.
individuals can make a difference through acts of extraordinary courage and compassion.
Before we wrap up this part of our deep dive,
Okay.
I want to bring up another incredible woman whose story, like Irina Sendler's, highlights the often unsung heroes of history.
Okay.
This is a story that's closely tied to Rosa Parks and the fight for civil rights,
Okay.
but you might not be familiar with it.
Right.
Have you ever heard of Claudette Colvin?
Ah, yes, Claudette Colvin.
Yeah.
Her story is a fascinating and often overlooked chapter in the history of the civil rights movement.
Okay.
It adds this crucial layer of complexity to our understanding of that era
Okay.
and highlights the courage of young people in the fight for justice.
I'm hooked. Tell me more.
Well, imagine this.
Okay.
9 months before, Rosa Parks famously refused to give up her seat on that Montgomery bus.
Uh-huh.
A 15-year-old Claudette Colvin did the exact same thing.
Wow.
She was riding the bus home from school when she was ordered to give up her seat to a white passenger, and she refused,
Wow.
citing her constitutional right.
15 years old.
I know.
To have the courage to stand up for herself like that in the Jim Crow South.
It's incredible, right? And she faced the same consequences as Parks' arrest, jail time, and public scrutiny.
So why isn't her story as well known?
That's a complex question with no easy answer.
Okay.
There are a few factors at play.
Okay.
Some historians suggest that the NAACP, the organization that spearheaded the Montgomery bus boycott, felt that Parks, as an adult with a more established reputation in the community, was a better face for the movement.
So there were strategic considerations.
Exactly. And while we can't know for sure what was going through the minds of those making those decisions, it's important to remember that this was a time of immense social and political upheaval.
Right.
They were fighting a system deeply entrenched in racist policies and practices.
Right.
And every move was calculated, every decision carefully weighed.
That makes sense.
It's also worth noting that Colvin was unmarried and pregnant at the time.
Oh, wow.
And sadly, those factors played a role in the decision not to put her at the forefront of the movement. There were concerns about how her personal circumstances might be perceived by the public, especially in the context of the deeply conservative social norms of that era.
It's heartbreaking to think about how those societal pressures, those judgments, influenced the course of history.
They did.
And it makes you realize how important it is to uncover these hidden stories, to give voice to those who may have been silenced or overlooked.
Absolutely. Claudette Colvin's story is a crucial piece of the civil rights movement puzzle, reminding us that the fight for equality involved countless individuals, many of whom never received the recognition they deserved.
Her story is so powerful.
It is.
It's a testament to the courage and determination of young people who are willing to risk everything to challenge the status quo. And it's a reminder that history is rarely a simple, straightforward narrative.
Right.
There are always multiple layers, different perspectives, and often untold stories waiting to be discovered.
Absolutely.
And that's what we're doing here.
That's what we're doing.
On this deep dive.
I'm glad to be here.
I'm glad you're here too.
Yeah, it's remarkable how all these stories spanning different times and places kind of converge on this idea of the unexpected power of individual action.
It's giving me chills just thinking about it.
Yeah.
Like that saying, right, the butterfly effect.
Yes.
One flap of a wing could eventually lead to a hurricane on the other side of the world.
Precisely. And in these cases, it's not just a hypothetical butterfly.
Yeah.
It's a real person making a choice, taking a stand, or simply doing what they believe is right. And those actions, amplified by the circumstances, create these ripples that can transform societies, alter the course of history, and even save countless lives.
I'm curious of all the stories we've dived into so far.
Yeah.
Which one has resonated with you the most?
That's a tough one.
Yeah.
They're all so compelling in their own way.
Right.
But I keep coming back to Stanislav Petrov. The weight of his decision, knowing that a potential nuclear holocaust hung in the balance, it's mind-boggling.
I get that. To be in that room under that kind of pressure.
I know.
It's almost impossible to fathom, and yet he went against protocol.
He did.
Trusted his gut and potentially averted a global catastrophe.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it?
It does.
What if someone else had been in his position?
Right.
Someone who didn't have his depth of understanding, his willingness to question the system.
It's a chilling thought.
It is.
Speaking of questioning the system, let's revisit Rachel Carson in Silent Spring.
All right.
It was a pivotal moment in how we view the environment, wasn't it?
Absolutely. Carson wasn't the first to raise concerns about pesticides.
No.
But she was the one who brought those concerns into the mainstream.
Right.
Forcing the world to confront the unintended consequences of its actions.
And she did it during a time when those kinds of ideas weren't exactly popular.
No.
The chemical industry was booming.
Yeah.
Pesticides were seen as a miracle solution to all sorts of problems.
Exactly. And you know what's even more fascinating?
What?
Carson initially faced pushback even from fellow scientists.
Really?
Many were skeptical of her findings.
Wow.
Reluctant to challenge the prevailing dogma of the time.
Wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So she was really fighting an uphill battle on multiple fronts.
She was, but her meticulous research, her ability to communicate complex scientific concepts in a way that resonated with the public, ultimately won out.
And that's what made Silent Springs such a turning point.
Right.
It wasn't just this like dry scientific treatise.
Exactly.
It was a beautifully written, deeply personal account of her observations and concerns.
Yes.
And it connected with readers on an emotional level.
Exactly. She made the science accessible and relatable.
Yeah.
And she did it with such passion and conviction that it is impossible to ignore.
It's like that quote, the stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone.
Oh, yeah.
Her work, initially dismissed by many,
became
the foundation for this whole new way of thinking about our relationship with the natural world.
And that's the power of a single voice.
Right.
A single book to change the course of history.
Yeah.
Silent Springs sparked this wave of activism leading to stricter regulations, the ban of DDT in the U.S., and the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency.
It's amazing to think about the ripple effect of her work.
I know.
And it's a reminder that even when facing powerful opposition, one person with the courage to speak truth to power can make a world of difference.
That's right. Speaking of courage in the face of unimaginable odds.
Yeah.
Let's return to Irina Sendler.
Okay.
And her extraordinary efforts to save Jewish children from the Warsaw Ghetto.
I still can't get over the sheer scale of her operation.
Right.
Smuggling 2,500 children out of a place like that.
It's incredible.
It's hard to fathom the risks she took.
Yeah.
The planning and coordination involved.
Yeah. It was an incredibly dangerous and complex undertaking.
Yeah.
Involving a network of helpers who were risking their lives every step of the way.
Right.
They used fake identities, forged documents, secret routes, anything to get the children to safety.
And they had to do all of this while constantly looking over their shoulders.
Right.
Knowing that discovery meant certain death.
Exactly. And it wasn't just about getting the children out of the ghetto.
Right.
They had to find places to hide them.
Yeah.
Families willing to take them in.
Right.
Knowing that they were putting their own lives in danger.
The level of trust involved.
Oh, no.
The selflessness.
Yeah.
It's truly inspiring.
And remember, Sendler not only rescued these children, but she also kept meticulous records of their real names and new identities.
Right.
Burying those lists in jars, hoping that one day families could be reunited.
Wow.
It was an act of hope amidst the darkest of times.
And she never gave up that hope.
Yeah.
Even after she was captured and tortured by the Gestapo. She could have saved herself by revealing the names and locations.
Right.
But she refused. Her courage and determination were simply unwavering.
It's a testament to the power of human resilience, the capacity for compassion and self-sacrifice.
Yeah.
Even in the face of unimaginable horrors.
Her story is a beacon of hope. A reminder that even in the darkest of chapters in human history, there were individuals who chose to fight for what was right, who risked everything to save innocent lives.
Absolutely.
Now, before we move on, I want to circle back to Claudette Colvin.
Okay.
The teenager who refused to give up her seat on that Montgomery bus 9 months before Rosa Parks.
Yes.
It's so important to acknowledge her courage.
It is.
Her role in the fight for civil rights.
Absolutely. Her story challenges the traditional narrative, reminding us that the movement wasn't just about a few iconic figures. It was about countless individuals, many of them young people, who were willing to put themselves on the line to challenge the status quo.
And her experience highlights the complexities of that era, the social and political pressures that influeed the movement's strategy.
It's a reminder that history is rarely straightforward.
Right.
There are always multiple perspectives, different motivations, and often untold stories that deserve to be brought to light.
And sometimes those untold stories like Claudette Colvin's can enrich our understanding of the past.
Right.
And inspire us to think differently about the present.
Exactly. Her story challenges us to question our assumptions.
Yeah.
To dig deeper and to recognize the contributions of those who may have been overlooked or forgotten.
It's a powerful reminder that history is not just something we read about in textbooks.
Right.
It's this living, breathing tapestry.
It is.
Woven from the experiences of countless individuals.
Yes.
Each with their own story to tell.
And those stories, when we take the time to listen,
yeah,
can teach us valuable lessons about courage, resilience, and the power of individual action to shape the course of human events.
I couldn't have said it better myself. It's like we've been on this incredible journey through history.
Yeah.
And it's all about these seemingly ordinary individuals.
Right.
Who, through their actions, ended up making an extraordinary impact.
It really highlights the interconnectedness of everything, doesn't it?
It does.
Like how even small acts of courage, defiance, or compassion can have these ripple effects that extend far beyond ourselves.
Right. It's like that saying we talked about earlier, the butterfly effect.
Yes.
But instead of a butterfly, it's Rosa Parks refusing to give up her seat.
Right.
Or Stanislav Petrov questioning a computer system.
Yeah.
Or Rachel Carson raising the alarm about environmental destruction.
And think about the ripple effects.
Yeah.
Parks' defiance sparked the Montgomery bus boycott.
Right.
Which played a crucial role in the U.S. civil rights movement.
Huge.
Petrov's decision potentially averted a nuclear war.
Oh my gosh.
The consequences of which are too horrific to contemplate.
Fine.
And Carson's Silent Spring ignited a global environmental movement that continues to shape policy and inspire activism to this day.
It's mind-blowing when you think about it that way.
It is.
These individuals weren't presidents, generals, or CEOs.
Right.
They weren't born into positions of power.
Right.
They were everyday people who, through their choices and actions, ended up changing the course of history.
And it's not just about those big headline-grabbing moments.
Right.
Think about Irina Sendler working tirelessly behind the scenes, risking her life to save Jewish children from the Warsaw Ghetto.
Yeah.
Her impact might not have been as publicly visible as someone like Rosa Parks, but her actions were no less heroic.
Absolutely. And let's not forget Claudette Colvin, whose story reminds us that the fight for justice often involves countless individuals whose names we may never know, but whose contributions are no less important.
Yes.
She stood up for what she believed in, even when it meant facing arrest and public scrutiny.
These stories challenge us to look beyond the simplified narratives, the textbook versions of history, and to recognize the complexity of the human experience.
It's so true.
It's a reminder that history is not just about dates, battles, and treaties. It's about the choices we make, the actions we take, and the impact we have on the world around us.
So what does this all mean for us?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah, what can we take away from these incredible stories?
I think the key takeaway here is that we all have the potential to make a difference.
Okay.
Our actions, no matter how small they may seem, can have ripple effects that extend far beyond ourselves. We are not just passive observers of history. We are active participants in shaping its course.
It's both empowering and humbling, isn't it?
It is.
Empowering because it reminds us that we have agency. That we can make choices that matter. And humbling because it highlights the interconnectedness of everything. The way our actions can impact others in ways we may never fully comprehend.
Exactly. It's a reminder that we should never underestimate the power of individual action.
Yeah.
The potential for good that exists within each of us.
I love that.
And it's a call to action.
Great.
An invitation to step into our own agency and make choices that contribute to a more just compassionate and sustainable world.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, let's carry these stories with us.
I agree.
Let's remember Rosa Parks, Stanislav Petrov, Rachel Carson, Irina Sendler, Claudette Colvin.
Yes.
And all the other unsung heroes who have shown us what it means to be human, what it means to make a difference.
Let their stories inspire us to act with courage. To think critically, to challenge injustice, to protect our planet, and to never give up hope in the face of adversity.
Beautifully said. Thanks for joining us on this journey.
My pleasure.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep making your own ripples in the world.